This video is part 2 of my ongoing series on Sacrosanctum Concilium, the sacred constitution on the Divine Liturgy from the Second Vatican Council. A link to part 1 can be found in the video description below. And we pick up at paragraph 14, the section entitled The Promotion of Liturgical Instruction and Active Participation. And we begin with the very concept of active participation and what exactly that means. And in paragraph 14 we read, Mother Church earnestly desires that all the faithful should be led to that fully conscious and active participation in liturgical celebrations, which is demanded by the very nature of the liturgy. Such participation by the Christian people as a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a redeemed people, is their right and duty by reason of their baptism. In other words, we should know what we are doing when we come to Mass, and the goal of the restoration and promotion of the sacred liturgy is to help parishioners do just that. Know what we are doing. But having served as a priest now for 16 years, this is one of the items that I think often gets misconstrued in liturgical circles. To have active participation means that you are praying along with the priest who is leading the congregation in prayer. It does not necessarily mean that you have to be doing something during the Mass in order for it to count. Rather, the opposite is often the case. To serve as a lector, an usher, a server, an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion often takes away from the experience of praying the Mass well as a participant. This was perhaps my biggest surprise upon ordination to the priesthood. It is difficult to actually pray well at Mass as a priest. I'm constantly worried about the lectors proclaiming well, the servers helping when help is needed, are there enough hosts to be consecrated, etc. There's a lot of distractions as a priest. And that really hit home the first time I celebrated a sung high Mass in the extraordinary form. I was constantly worried about what I had to do next, even with the help of a very good master of ceremonies. So much so at the end of that Mass, I wasn't sure what had all just happened. The Mass was beautiful, but it was not something I could necessarily enjoy just for the enjoyment of it because I was so caught up in what I had to do next. These are not bad things, but they emphasize why, as a priest, it's important to do our daily holy hour outside of the Mass, because at Mass we have a unique and profound role to play, leading our people in prayer. And yes, the better we as priests pray the Mass, the more our people will be able to enter into the prayer at Mass too. This is the actual participation that the Council Fathers call for, not a mere multiplication of roles or responsibilities at Mass. As the Council Fathers note, the sacred liturgy is the primary and indispensable source from which the faithful are to derive the true Christian spirit. From there, the document moves on to discuss the importance of the formation of clergy in helping our people enter into these sacred mysteries. Because if we haven't been formed in these rites, we will not be able to pass along their meaning and importance to the faithful of God. From here, the document delves into some of the norms that are to guide the reform of the Divine Liturgy in the years to come after the Council. The Council itself did not develop these norms, but outlined guidelines to be followed in the years after the Council, which ultimately will lead to the publication of the Mass of Paul VI in 1970, commonly called the Novus Ordo Mass, the new rite of the Mass, which is still in use in the vast majority of parishes in the world today. First, there are general norms outlined which give certain perspectives that are to be used throughout the rest of the document. Of particular note is paragraph 22. Here, the authority to make these changes is outlined, and it is clearly stated that it is the Holy See that has this authority in concert and in cooperation with the various bishops' conferences around the world. We priests, we do not have this authority, as the third section of this paragraph clearly states. Therefore, no other person, even if he be a priest, may add, remove, or change anything in the liturgy on his own authority. Paragraph 23 exhorts that any of these changes that are coming should in some way grow organically from forms already existing. In the post-conciliar period, there was a lot of debate about how to interpret the new rites in the Latin Rite of the Catholic Church. Are they something entirely new, or are they organic developments of what came before? Roughly interpreted, is there a hermeneutic of rupture or hermeneutic of continuity? The document seems to make clear that there's a call for continuity, seeing the newly developed rites as intimately connected with what came previously, This helps in this celebration and entrance into the mystery that is being conveyed in these rites. This is the first lens by which developments in the sacred liturgy should be viewed through. The second lens, which is addressed in paragraph 24, is a call for an increased use of sacred scripture in the divine liturgy. After all, it is from the scriptures that actions and signs derive their meaning. Prior to the council, there was mainly a one-year cycle of readings based in the Gospel of Matthew. Additionally, there were a few selections from the Old Testament in the Sunday cycle of readings, and the weekday cycle of readings did not even exist. And for me, this is one of the best fruits of the liturgical movement that culminated in the new rites of Mass promulgated in 1970, the wide-scale implementation of Scripture into the rites. From the 3-year Sunday cycle of the readings, the adoption of the 2-year weekly cycle of readings, plus the stronger connection within the rites to the scriptural citations and allusions. This is perhaps, for me, one of the biggest wins in terms of the council. After these general norms, the document moves into a more specific guidelines for the development after the council. There's a general reminder that all liturgical services are public, so that even when I celebrate Mass privately at my home chapel in my day off, it's still a public prayer of the Church. The faithful are reminded throughout this section that they are a constitutive part of the liturgy as well, as it calls for your active participation multiple times throughout this section. Again, that active participation does not necessarily mean that you're doing something, but that you are praying along with the prayers as the priest prays them. You are actively engaged in what is happening on the altar and in the sanctuary. Those who do have offices to perform are charged to perform them with sincerity, piety, and decorum demanded by so exalted a ministry and rightly expected of them by God's people. In order to perform these functions with the right decorum, the document calls for those who perform certain ministries to be deeply imbued with the spirit of the liturgy, so that they should know how their role in the liturgy contributes to the overall goal of a deeper and more prayerful experience of worship before God. Finally, in paragraph 30, we get to a more complete definition of actual participation, and I quote, "To promote active participation, the people should be encouraged to take part by means of acclamations, responses, psalmody, antiphons, and songs, as well as by actions, gestures, and bodily attitudes. And at the proper times, all should observe a reverent silence." After these general norms and communal norms, there are also didactic and pastoral norms developed. Didactic is the recognition that the liturgy teaches us about God, as paragraph 33 clearly states. Although the sacred liturgy is above all things the worship of the divine majesty, it likewise contains much instruction for the faithful. For in the liturgy, God speaks to his people, and Christ is still proclaiming his gospel, and the people reply to God both by song and prayer, which is a good reminder. The liturgy is addressed to God first and foremost, and the prayers that are prayed by the priest are said on behalf of the people who are gathered there. In the rite that existed at the time of the council, this was shown by the priest facing the same direction as the people, towards God, to whom he is addressing his words and actions. But over the many years that the Tridentine Rite had been celebrated, there started to be other things attached to the liturgy and to the process of the ritual. In response, the Council Fathers recognized that the Roman Rite should be distinguished by a noble simplicity. They should be short, clear, and unencumbered by useless repetitions. They should be within the people's powers of comprehension and normally should not require much explanation. A brief aside, if I may. I do celebrate both rites of the Roman Church, the Novus Ordo, as it's called, the Mass in English, as is practiced in most parishes. But I also do say, on occasion, the traditional Latin rite of the Mass, too. And I will note this call to be unencumbered by useless repetitions. It's probably a good call, as the number of times that the sign of the cross is made over the gifts is greatly reduced from the traditional Latin Mass to the current Novus Ordo Mass. If this is a good change or not, I guess I'm going to leave that determination to others smarter than myself. Building right on that last paragraph, there's a call to have the words and actions of the liturgy be congruent, to be in sync, as they mutually help enrich the meaning of what is being celebrated. There's also a call to have a sermon or homily, again, as this was not something that was necessarily a part of the previous ritual of the Mass. This seems like a good addition. A paragraph that seems to be largely dropped, however, is number 36, which states, in part, that particular law remaining in force, the use of the Latin language is to be preserved in the Latin rites. The paragraph gives some guidance as to what should be translated and presented in the vernacular, the primary language of the people at Mass, but there seems to be a preference in the document for common parts of the liturgy to be kept, at least in part, in Latin. Regretfully, this isn't done much in practice today. Paragraphs 37 to 40 do talk about enculturation, how to make the liturgy come alive in different parts of the world, and provides for guidelines for what can be adapted in different ways versus what should always be consistent. And as we come to the end of this first chapter in Sacrosanctum Concilium, there is talk of how to promote a genuine liturgical reform in both the diocese and at the parish level. Clearly, the bishop is the high priest of his flock and the chief liturgist in his diocese. As such, the liturgical life at the cathedral should be of note and example to other parishes in the diocese. From the cathedral, the life of the parish should be connected to the mind and the heart of the bishop. What we do here in our parishes should match up and takes a lead from what happens in the cathedral with the bishop, and have some balance and association with what happens in neighboring parishes as well. And with that, we'll bring this section to an end. We'll pick up next time in chapter 2 of this great document, the most sacred mystery of the Eucharist. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. I'll be back in a few weeks with the next segment. God bless.